Training frequency. What is the simple way to identify what the best training frequency is for you so you can develop a split that's going to lead to tons of gains? I have been training for over 15 years. I've been coaching for over 10 years. I keep up to date with the latest evidence to give me insights into what they're finding through science, but I also listen to experts who have wisdom beyond my years to identify what frequencies are working for them. And obviously, through my own experience with my clients, myself, I kind of come to this well-rounded, evidence-based kind of understanding of what frequency may be best. And I have hopefully a simple solution for you guys to be able to follow today. And I'm going to give you a practical example of something that I've recently modified with my training frequency during my contest prep this year. First of all, what is training frequency exactly? So I would identify training frequency as essentially how often within, let's call it a 7-day period. It could be 10 days because a microcycle doesn't necessarily have to be a Gregorian calendar 7 days, but I think most people think about it this way. It's your training split over 7 days. How many times within that 7-day period are you training a particular muscle group? So are you training your back twice a week, once a week, 4 times a week? What's happening there? And that gives you a training frequency. Something within that mix that has to be talked about a little bit is people will think about like a bro split as like a low frequency split, because I don't know exactly what the typical bro split looks like, but often people think about it as training one muscle group a week. But there's going to be overlap because some muscles are involved within multiple lifts because they're compound lifts, and so they're multi-joint lifts, and so multiple muscle groups will be involved. So if you're training your triceps and shoulders on one day and then you train your chest on another day, your triceps are involved with, or if you did your triceps or arm day, say you have an arm day, a shoulder day, and then a chest day, on your compound chest movements, triceps are involved. On your compound like overhead pressing, triceps are involved. On your arm day, you're training your triceps. That's suddenly 3 times a week where you thought maybe it was once. Or your biceps, you train them on your arm day, your pulling day, they're involved in both, right? Or if you have a quad day and a hamstring day, both are going to likely be training your glutes if you're doing a hip hinge and a squat pattern, a lunge pattern, you know? So you have to take into consideration some of those finer details within there as well. But the basic understanding is how many times a week are you training that muscle as your training frequency. So let's have a bit of a think about what the research is saying. And so what does the research say to start there? Well, there was actually a recent paper from my guys, Joshua Pelland, Jacob Remmett, Zach Robinson, Mike Zodos' lad, Seth Hinton, who did a great job. And they have this very recent paper, The Resistance Training Dose Response, Meta-Regressions Exploring the Effects of Weekly Volume and Frequency on Muscle Growth, Hypertrophy, and Strength. So we obviously only care about this thing. So let's kind of see what they found. As a primer, meta-regressions are looking at multiple studies and then putting them all together to see what does the wealth of evidence point to, rather than just being like, oh, this study said this study said this study said this. It's getting all those studies that they require or they deem good to have included within the paper, and then they see, okay, what direction is it going in? Where is it pointing? Because you'll have some outliers, and then you'll get some data that kind of they move in one direction. Similar to if you're weighing yourself every day, then you can take a weekly average, and then you can look at trends over time. Kind of similar to that versus just cherry picking one way in, you know? So this has been something that's been said for quite a while, and it seemed to confirm it with here, was when volume is matched, there is no clear, consistent benefit to any different training frequency. So that's a consistent finding, but it's pinned upon volume being matched. And volume is a variable that we can play with. It's not always matched. There was a small benefit to frequencies above 1. So it's slightly leaning towards 2 times a week or more to be slightly better. And theoretically, that tends to also make sense for a variety of reasons, which we can talk about in a bit. But if you love training 1 time a week, you could absolutely be growing incredibly well. That could be the best for you. If that suits your lifestyle, your preferences, you can go at it real hard. That might be best, but probably more than that is slightly better. I imagine most of you do train a muscle more than once a week, but you don't have to necessarily. especially to grow. But growing at your best is most of the time what people are thinking about. So people like to also lean upon mechanistic data, because you'll probably have heard people talk about, hey, your muscle protein synthesis, which is muscle growth, is only elevated after you train for up to 48 hours. Maybe even less than that, the more well-trained you are. And so they use that to kind of support their rationale for training at higher frequencies. But the data doesn't seem to align with that. It hasn't been seen. And that doesn't mean that that isn't the case. It just means we haven't seen it yet. And so as a kind of, you couldn't be like, I've got this research that strongly supports that rationale. It's more of a like, hey, theoretically on mechanistic data. And you have to be careful using that sort of rationale, I think, using mechanistic data when we really care about the outcome of hypertrophy. But I will say, and actually what I will say here is observationally, I think, again, evidence-based practices taking into consideration observations, anecdotes, obviously they're weaker forms of evidence, but how many bodybuilders do you know that have grown very, very well on less than 2 times a week, or not on really high frequencies? Because again, that mechanistic rationale would base, the more advanced you are, MPS isn't elevated for as long, so more advanced, higher frequencies would suit better. But when I think about some of the biggest bodybuilders, they tend to actually side with lower frequencies. And that might be tied into volume, because quite often they can't do tons of volume because they can't recover from tons of volume. And they also get beat up for an extended time. Therefore, you think about, I don't know, Ronnie Coleman, his leg day, he's just trashed. Or I think about, I know, Tom Platz. He used to train his legs very infrequently, and they just really grow very well, and so on and so forth. So I think, yeah, observationally at least, people seem to grow with a wide variety of frequencies, which tends to align with the research to date at least. So practically, how do I think about divvying up your volume for your training frequency, and a simple way to identify your best training frequency? So what I will say is, first of all, this might change over time. Like I said, those big bodybuilders who are only training muscle groups sometimes once per week via like that bro split, which some people have termed like a pro split. And obviously, like I've already said at the start, some muscle groups aren't truly trained once a week on that split. But the reason for that is your volume demands will change over time. You may be able to recover from more or less at various times in your life for reasons of training advancement, or it could literally just be environmental. You know, maybe you've got a new job, or you've got a child that's come into the world, your sleep is suddenly terrible. These things can influence volume. And so the reason I'm bringing up volume, and when I think about volume, just to make it clear, I think about set volume. So how many sets are you doing for that muscle group? I find it as a way to divide up this volume. So the more that you have to do, the higher frequencies you probably want. So it's similar to, like, I don't know, the more work you have to do in the week, probably, like, for example, as an online coach, the more clients you have, the more you probably want to spread them in through your week in terms of weekly updates, if that's what you're doing. So if you only have 10 clients, you might be able to do those in 1-2 days comfortably. But if you have 50, suddenly you want to spread that over more days. So because that ensures that the quality of work done is high. It has been theorized that there's a cap for kind of per session volume for a muscle group, in terms of when you go over that, now you're just leading to more muscle breakdown versus muscle protein synthesis. So that could be a problem and a concern, but that isn't necessarily confirmed as yet. What I will say is we see best growth from the initial sets we do, and then there's diminishing returns. So I still think it theoretically, practically makes sense that higher volumes, you kind of want to spread that out. So spreading it out, just similar to your work, will lead to higher quality work being done. And if we're getting a higher quality work done, the stimulus should be better for muscle growth, and so we should grow more. So that's kind of where I'm basing this recommendation. And I think a reasonable place to start is to divide whatever weekly volume you have for your compound, or rather your big muscle groups, let's say, which are most often trained via some compound lifts. So your chest, your back, your hamstrings, your quads, you want to divide that by about 10. So in a single session, you might do as much as 10, but you want to divide that and round that up. So for example, if your back needs 16 sets, you're saying 16 sets is where I'm doing my back training. I want to divide that by 10. That gives me 1.6, round that to 2. So you then want to split your 16 sets, 8 and 8 across 2 days. I think that's very, very reasonable. For your isolation-based lifting, more of your what would you call these? Your kind of your delts, your calves, your abs, the fringe muscles. The term of that I'm looking for is escaped me for the moment. The smaller muscle groups, let's put it that way. I would say dividing them by 5 makes more sense because they're hitting these compound lifts, as I mentioned at the start. Your triceps are involved within overhead pressing, all your pressing. Same with your side delts. So I think dividing them by 5 makes sense because they're going to get a good hit of volume elsewhere. And so if your side delts need 15 sets across the week, divide that by 5, you've got 3. Nice and simple. So I think that works really well for a lot of people. But feel free to experiment. And like I said, if your volume demands change over time, this frequency can change over time. And the thing to also pay attention to is how you're recovering. This might be termed like a stress response adaptation curve. For some people, they do like 2 sets of RDLs and they're sore for like a week. So this kind of divvying up might not quite work well for them. They might want to have a think about how best that suits them, therefore. Or you might try on my delts, training them 3 times a week. It just might not work for you. You might find there's an overlapping soreness or fatigue, so your quality of volume isn't quite as good. So you might actually be better doing it over 2 sessions, for example. See what leads to the best progress. That is a fundamental thing for me, is what frequency, what volume, what training paradigm is leading to the best progress over time. So what's leading you to hitting PRs in the best time period? Because I think fundamentally progressive overload is fundamental to signifying we're growing muscle. So how long does it take you to hit those PRs? If you're able to see that progress is coming quicker through a higher or lower training frequency, that's probably for you, right? Probably a good idea. So let's put it to an example. And so for me right now, I'm deep in contest prep. I am almost 2 weeks out from my final show of the season. And it's been like a 30-week comp prep, somewhere around that. So I've been dieting a long time. My recoverability is far, far lower than it very often is. So my average volume has come down from where I started my contest prep and my off season. So because I've got less volume that I'm doing, my frequency has come down. And so I slowly moved, for example, my delts, my calves, my abs from 4 times a week to 3. And I've moved my back, chest, hamstrings, and quads from 3 times a week in my off season and starter prep to then 2. So my split was upper, lower, upper, lower, upper, lower, pretty high frequency. And now it's moved to push, pull, legs, push, pull, legs. And I have found that to allow me to get higher quality volume done. It also suited my psychology. It's been really, really great to do it that way. So that gives you some understanding of training frequency. So guys, hopefully in summary, that's given you a simple way to identify your best training volume. Now it's simple in theory because I've given you those kind of, hey, you've got a certain amount of volume, divide it by this, divide it by this. This gives you a training frequency to round up to and start working with. It gives you a framework, but like anything, like a calorie calculator, a macro calculator, just like the science in general, gives you a starting point. You're your own individual. You have to then experiment. You are N equals 1. You are a self-experiment and assess and analyze what's leading to your best results. And that is going to give you your best training frequency for now. And so hopefully this has been helpful. This is something I do with my clients. We start with what is a baseline program. We assess, we modify, we tinker to continue getting the best results possible. And on that note, if you are interested in online coaching, that is what I do most of the time. I have a solid number of clients that I work with to get them the best results possible. That's why you invest in a coach, right? To take you further to your destination in a more efficient way than you otherwise could. And it's a lot of fun to kind of tinker around with some of these variables. So if you're interested in that, it's always linked in the description. Otherwise, guys, if you haven't subscribed, do subscribe. Give me a comment, any questions, comment down below, give a thumbs up. And I appreciate you as always. I'll catch you in the next one.